Morning. Welcome to Frank's School, 113th day. I'm making of the fourth year. I'm making a bit of a pause in the run through history, kings and queens of England. I'm going to say you don't need to look at any more for my purposes today or tomorrow, or probably for a week and a half. We're pausing at the beginning of the 18th century. And one of the things I want to deal with, well, this isn't a reason, but what I want to deal with during the reigns of King George the First and Second is, well, let me back up and say that in the whole year, I had said one of my goals is to figure out why, personally, I find that the beauty falls out of what people consider classics for me. And I had said by about 1880, why is it that there are few things whose beauty so inspire me as what had happened before? Well, okay, this is probably going to be a little erratic what I'm saying, but in a way I think the disappearance of beauty might have been a little bit, for me, like the canary in the coal mine. In other words, other developments that are going on that are really important, like carbon monoxide or too much carbon dioxide in the air, appears first with the canary in the coal mine. Well, with me, I can't explain a lot of this stuff yet. Maybe I never will be able to, but I see the beauty disappearing for me. Now, centralization now hath made his masterpiece. I found myself quoting Shakespeare. It was confusion, of course, and that comes from Macbeth when the king had been killed. But I have learned through this course through the kings and queens of England that this actually occurred earlier than I had maybe realized. It was a gradual process, I knew that, but maybe by the time of Henry VIII it was already true. But it seems to be fairly unstoppable then, so far for a while. And if you look online and you look at Google energy use and history and take a look at charts or kilocalories per person, you'll see the dramatic use of energy or degradation of energy, maybe I should say. And it starts, well, it doesn't really appear very much before about the time I'm talking about, the beginning of the 1700s, the 18th century, and then it takes off. Now that's widely known. And I knew about that, but I've suspected for a long time that is related to what I see personally. I wrote California up here because I think California may also be an example of a canary in a coal mine. There's a severe drought going on in California, and there have been many severe droughts in the world before. But there is a state, there is an area that was built on the idea of cheap energy and available water. Well, I don't want to go into that right now. I may later, as I deal with water over the next week and next month or so. All right, these guys: Pope, Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift, Fielding, can't think of his first name, Defoe. These are authors out of the 18th century, and periodicals began to appear at that time, newspapers and magazines. Well, as I was looking at this stuff, I remembered that I had purposely decided when I was choosing courses at Harvard to avoid the 18th century. I knew I was going to have trouble there because already I think I saw so little that really appealed to me. This was a literature of satire, making fun of things. Defoe, now his Robinson Crusoe, I really liked that, of course, but then later I learned that at the time, well, that's kind of a special case, Robinson Crusoe. But anyway, when I had the option of choosing a course that would study the literature of the 18th century, I thought, I don't think, if I can avoid that, I want to stay out of that, and I did. Now the Romantics, they come after it, and I'll have more to say about that. I did study them. My reading speed was a factor. The whole time I was going through Harvard, I'm not a very fast reader. and so the language of poetry was much better for me than prose. But see, that's part of it. You know, with the use of more energy, printing presses began to crank out. Books became so cheap and so available, and there's so much of it, and people began to spend so much of their time reading, sitting and reading. I've said before, I think literacy is overrated. That's a shocking statement, but well, I hadn't better go into that too much either. Now, Baroque music, I love it. There's just no doubt about it. I love Baroque music, and I'm pausing to hope I can get you to share enthusiasm for George Frederick Handel's Part 2 of his Messiah, and also from some of the work around Holy Week and Easter of Johann Sebastian Bach. I love Baroque music. So why don't I like Baroque art? I don't. And I don't like Baroque architecture. You know, it's from the same time. You know, why not? And fashion, the way people dress, no, I don't like it. Sculpture, I don't like any of this stuff. You know, the fashion, men were wearing these wigs at the time, and I always thought that was so bizarre. Dance, maybe, yes. But dance is tied up with the music. So much of Baroque music was based on the dance. And I think, whoa, there must have been some pretty good dances, because that music's pretty good. You know, the dance is not so well known. Now, in this time, science and scientific instruments were made great advances. They were technically much better, and I've got to sort of tip my hat to that. But then I think, well, what did it end up in doing, though, these advances in science? No more did people think of the world as having only 4 elements, you know, earth, wind, fire, and water. No, they began to look at it differently. All right, well, so I'm going to turn to Baroque music, and I don't have a good answer for this. Music, the discovery or the rediscovery of equal temperament in music allowed it to take off, and it was not yet big. I mean, music could still be made by relatively small groups. Not until after Mozart, really, did the orchestras get so big and centralized. But already, well, I don't want to go on to that too much. Now, these are 3 acts in English law: Act of Unity, Act of Toleration, and Education Act. And they have to do with nonconformists, also known as dissenters. Now, I studied them a little bit to prepare for today. What exactly were nonconformists? Well, they were ones who did not go along with the Anglican Church. They were not willing to do things exactly the way the Anglican Church said. They had different religious ideas. Here in Pennsylvania, United States in general, but in Pennsylvania in particular, there's, as I've said before, there's so many vestiges of these things. Well, you know, I see them in a way as fellow decentralists, in a way. I mean, some of them died for their cause. They were not willing to be part of that whole Anglican thing. There were things that they didn't like about it. The act, this last one, the Education Act, made it that the schools were supported by the state. The schools that were not nonconformists, and I'm not as well educated on this as I should be, but maybe I should be better. I have Pennsylvania here, because when I first started to teach here, I taught in public schools for 35 years. And I had found that, well, they had the children. They had a monopoly of the children. So that was where, and I was born to be a teacher. I figured that out. I think I was born to be a teacher. And so where are the children to teach? The state had them all. But in the public schools, well, with very, very few private schools. And they struggled so. Eventually, the homeschooling law came along, which was like a gift from heaven. But when I started to teach, even though the schools, the state had all the children, Pennsylvania was very, very diverse. The school districts were all so independent. And yet, in my teaching career, I saw that get absorbed by standardization, and it was a struggle for me. I mean, from that point on, it's amazing I could keep teaching what I taught because it was so non-standard. Well, finally, coming down through here now. Finally, I think in a way it's ironic that the literature that comes out of this time, that I think is probably best known. If you had somebody had to recite something from memory, just on the spot, in the United States anyway, they wouldn't come up with anything from these guys. I don't think anything. But the Christian hymns that began to be composed and sung. You go back to Germany with Martin Luther, with the Reformation, where the congregations actually began to sing in their own language, so different from when the Roman Catholic Church was so centralized. So with that great breaking away, Germans began to compose their own hymns, and Martin Luther and others went to folk songs and gave them religious, that everybody knew, gave them religious words. In England, the Wesley family is the one that I would zero in on, but they're not the only ones. Now, these were nonconformists. These were dissenters, and they were not in the cities in general. In my mind, I think of them as traveling around the countryside and under great disadvantage, but they were singing hymns, and sometimes, eventually, in four-part harmony, sometimes a cappella. But hymns now, and I ran into that in the public schools. I was teaching poetry and rhyme and meter, and I did in my course the first year, probably around the 70th day or so. I was teaching that terms of verse, I called it, and yet I couldn't really use them because they were religious, and the church and state have to be different here in the United States. So here was this vast body of wonderful poetry, really wonderful poetry. It was not really available. Next year, I may do something with that because that poetry is really fine. But it seems like it takes care of itself. And now, in my current state of affairs, now that I'm retired, I'm much freer with my time. And I have begun to really indulge myself in learning about these Pennsylvania groups, the Mennonites especially, that aren't. Now I can see them, and I can visit them, and I can talk with them, and they're around, and I can encourage homeschooling as well, where it was harder to do when I was teaching in public school. Well, ragged. I'm sorry about this, but in any case, we're gonna turn to Baroque music and water over the next week and a half, and then water will probably go on after that. Bye for